Hey guys, happy Labor Day week. This week we're going to talk about the American Revolution. Just to give you a heads up, I've created two videos since normally we break our notes into 2 days. The videos will break us up into the two different sections of the American Revolution that we're going to cover. And then the notes for this week, there is a Tuesday note and a Wednesday note section, but they are all on one document. So when you are done with both pages, you will submit the document as one to be graded because we are a shorter week this week due to the Labor Day holiday. So when you fill out the entire page, you can turn it in, but feel free to break that into two different days worth of work. All right, so this week we get to talk about the American Revolution. Last week was the Road to Revolution, which was talking about all of the events and big things that led to American colonists finally saying, you know what, we've had enough. We're breaking away from Great Britain to be our own country and no longer a colonial arm extension of Great Britain. Okay, so big things we talked about last week, all of the acts, all of the taxes. We started with the French and Indian War and how that led to the Proclamation of 1763 and how all of these acts and taxes were passed to make up for the war debt from the French and Indian War. And how at the end of the day, the colonists were just kind of not happy with the results of the end of salutary neglect and not getting what they were promised from the French and Indian War. Now, one of the biggest things that we talked about last week were all of those acts and all of those taxes. Part of those were the coercive acts that the colonists dubbed, they nicknamed the intolerable acts. I want you to watch this video right here that is going to remind you of the specifics of the intolerable acts, and that will help you fill out your notes. But I put this little image here because the coercive acts were passed because the colonists did the Boston Tea Party. The Sons of Liberty did the Boston Tea Party, which was obviously not an actual party. It was them boarding a merchant ship from the British East India Company and dumping thousands of dollars worth of tea into the Boston Harbor. Now, because of this, the King of England punished the colonists by closing down the port of Boston, which left Boston, broke, hungry, starving, in not a good time. So the colonists obviously wanted the intolerable acts to be lifted, the coercive acts to be lifted, and things to be changed. Their argument was the Sons of Liberty did this. It wasn't the entirety of the colonies, nor was it everyone who lived in Boston that participated. So it certainly was cruel to punish everyone for the actions of a few, which you know all about that because you're in high school. So this led to the decision to meet together. All of the colonists all of the colonies, except Georgia, sent representatives to the city of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. Remember that beautiful Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, to hash out what they should do about the intolerable acts. So the First Continental Congress met to, hey, let's talk about how we're going to get the king to get these intolerable acts gone. And then number two, is there a way that we could restore the relationship that we had with England before French and Indian War took off, back when there was that salutary neglect, that concept of, hey, we are your colonies, but we pretty much get to do what we want and you can ignore us. We'll all be happy if we do that, but we can still technically belong to England. When this colony or Congress met, it was much like our political system today, where all of the delegates that came from the different colonies were very different and had very different political views. There were three main groups of people that met in Carpenter's Hall for our First Continental Congress. They were the very radical group who wanted to completely break away immediately and be their own country. There was the moderate group who wanted to compromise, who wanted to come up with a way that would not be destructive, but please the people in the colonies and please Great Britain. And then there was the conservatives who really just wanted to work it out without any kind of violence or making King George any more angry than he already was. Now, loyalists were not represented, and a loyalist, was somebody who was remaining loyal to the British crown. They wanted to 100% stay colonies and be loyal to England, whereas the radical, the moderate, and the conservatives were all patriots. They were all people who were kind of for a revolution, but each of them had different viewpoints for how that was going to happen. Okay. The things that were decided in this first meeting were that they officially sent a request to King George to repeal the Intolerable Acts and to give the colonists some power. So to open Boston Harbor back up and to allow the colonists to go back and have kind of their own government system running themselves instead of the king having total control. Obviously, they realized that war could happen. And so in this Continental Congress, they also decide to put together a militia. Not a full-blown army. This is a very makeshift army full of, farmers and blacksmiths and craftsmen, a hodgepodge group of guys that they just say, all right, that these guys are going to be here in case we have to do any actual fighting, which is good that they organized this when they did, because they're going to need them very soon. And maybe you remember in middle school, you learned about the Minutemen, men that could be ready at a minute's notice. This is what this was. All right. So just a reminder, First Continental Congress happens in September in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. Okay. That's September of 1774. Flip a little map here. Okay, September of 74. So October, November, December, January, February, March, we hit April, and we need that militia that we came up with. In April of 1775, the colonists have spent time since the First Continental Congress collecting some weapons and some materials just in case they're going to need it to fight the British. Well, King George gets wind that the colonists are doing this. He also gets wind of this revolutionary activity, things that people like the very much the radicals like Samuel Adams are trying to do, or trying to spread this very patriotic fever across the colonies to break away and be their own country. So the king orders two things. Number one, he orders that some of these extreme patriots be arrested in Lexington, which is near Boston, Massachusetts. And he orders that a small stockpile of weapons be seized in Concord, which is right beside Lexington, also near Boston in Massachusetts. So this comes to be known as Lexington and Concord. We say Concord here in the South, but my freshman year roommate in college was from this area. She was actually from the city of Concord, and she made it very known that they pronounce it Concord. So we're going to say Concord instead of Concord. You are also familiar with the famous poem, Listen, My Children, and You Shall Hear of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. I have it linked here for you. It's set to a really fun beat, so you can sing along to it. Paul Revere and William Dawes find out that the British troops are coming to try to take the stockpile of weapons. And so they ride through the areas of Lexington and Concord, getting those Minutemen prepared and ready to come try to block the British from seizing that stockpile. And the Minutemen of Lexington actually meet, like it's right in the middle of town. They face the British and try to stop them from crossing through Lexington to get to Concord. They end up fighting twice. The first time they are trying to block them, stop them from passing. 8 colonists die. They're automatically forced to retreat. This is obviously, they're standing up to a much better army. And so they run away. The British continue through Lexington. They go to Concord. They burn down all of the weapons that were stockpiled, which really wasn't a lot. It was a very small amount, but they would destroy them. And then they turn around and march back to Boston through Lexington. They get ambushed on the way back. And shockingly, 250 British troops are killed by these militiamen who are firing at them from cover as they march back. And it forces the British troops to kind of disperse and run, and they're being picked off as they're retreating back to Boston. This was very embarrassing for the British troops. And in this event, we have this shot heard around the world, this idea that these were the first actual physical shots of the American Revolution. This is when violence really started, like warfare started. And we don't know if it was a shot that was fired by a colonist or a shot that was fired from somebody of the British military. We'll never know. But this is the beginning kind of the revolution. Like, here is violence, here is death. Here are two sides of a military, of two militaries coming together and fighting each other. I have a clip for you too of the Battle of Lexington and Concord. if you would watch that, and that will help you fill out your notes and give you an idea of what it looked like. All right, so we've had in April fighting. Well, after Lexington and Concord, we decide we gotta meet again. The Second Continental Congress has got to meet again in a month. They meet in May, so April to May 1775. They meet together, and they were like, "Okay, we've had violence. What are we going to do?" The New England colonies want to break away. They want to be their own country because they've been kind of the center of the whole revolution. If you think about it, everything was like the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party. Lexington and Concord are two towns outside of Boston. Everything's been happening in this New England area. So they want to break away. The middle colonies want to negotiate. The southern colonies, quite frankly, are the ones that don't want to join. They see this as New England's war. They want to keep up a good relationship with England because England buys all of their cotton and tobacco. So they don't want to break away. But in this Second Continental Congress, it's decided that, all right, we might try for peace, but we're going to prepare for war. And George Washington, who is chosen because he's from Virginia, and thought he'd be seen as somebody to kind of help rally the South into the idea of an American Revolution, he's chosen as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. So once again, watch this video that I have linked for you. It will help you. But that is the big thing out of the Second Continental Congress. George Washington is chosen to lead the Continental Army. Now, a month later, in June, we have our first official battle, even though war has not been declared yet. So here's another act of violence that happens. The funny thing is, it's called the Battle of Bunker Hill, but it took place on Breed's Hill. We got the hill wrong. And in 200 years of history, we have not gone back and changed the name of this to the Battle of Breed's Hill, which makes me laugh. In this battle, the colonists took the high ground of Breed's Hill. The British were at the bottom, and it was one of those old-fashioned capture the flag things where whoever kept the hill is who won the battle. Britain takes the hill, so technically the colonists lose the battle. But over 1,000 British were hurt or killed. So this is considered a victory for the colonists because they were able to stand up against the great and powerful British military, and they didn't die like dogs. That is why the Battle of Bunker Hill is so important, is because it was not a complete and utter failure for the colonists. Okay. Now, a month after the Battle of Bunker Hill, in July, the American colonists sign and send the Olive Branch Petition to King George III. If you think about what has led up to this, we've had our Continental Congresses, we've had Lexington and Concord, we've had an official battle where it's been the Continental Army versus the British Redcoats versus the British Royal Army. We've had fighting start. We realize war is going to be difficult and tough, so let's try to not have war. So the document is drafted called the Olive Branch Petition because obviously when you send an olive branch, to someone, you're extending a sign of peace. And this is the most suck up document if there ever was one. That's why I have Bugs Bunny there doing the eyes, because this document is hysterical because it's really trying to butter up the king and being like, all right, please, let's not have a war because we know we're going to get our butts kicked. And I've underlined parts for you to really point that out. Like, to the king's most excellent majesty, your most gracious sovereign, we're your faithful subjects. You're not faithful subjects. You've been doing revolutionary activity. You're not being faithful. Entreat your majesty's gracious attention to this humble petition. Blah, 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 blah. They really try to suck up. Does it work? Absolutely not. The king doesn't take it, and he declares the kings are in a state of rebellion and declares them ungrateful colonists, and so thus we go. Now, the Olive Branch Petition was sent 1 year before the Declaration of Independence is sent, so this really is the last-ditch effort to try to make up. Common Sense is a pamphlet that was written by Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine is an extreme patriot. He, once again, is on that side of like, let's break away and be our own country. He writes it in January of 1776, so 6 months before the Declaration of Independence is going to be signed. Thomas Paine was actually fresh off the boat from England. He was not born in the colonies. He was born in England. And he wrote a pamphlet, and it was printed and passed around all over the colonies, and it really helped change the mind of the colonists who were not on the side of having a full-blown revolution. And he said, look, it is just plain common sense that the colonies should be separate from Britain. America is this huge and vast continent. It is totally far away from the tiny little island of Britain. So why should this huge, vast area be controlled by a tiny little island that's 6,000 miles away? He said, the king and the parliament are corrupt. Why are we going to listen to them? Okay. Why are we going to let them run a place that is so different from England and so far away from England? Now he has a point, and his writings once again truly changed the mind of colonists. So, Declaration of Independence. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia proposed to the Continental Congress a resolution to be independent from Britain in June of 1776. On July 2nd, his resolution passes, where people agree that yes, we should be independent from Britain. On July 4th, the Congress adopts the Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson, but also by other men as well were a part of it. The rest, they say, is history. That is why July 4th is our Independence Day, because that is the day that the Declaration of Independence is adopted by the Continental Congress, which the Declaration of Independence formally declares that the 13 colonies are the United States of America, a country separate and apart from England. It is an amazing document, but obviously there are issues with it, and you're seeing those issues play out today. At the founding of our country, who was claiming freedom and who actually got to be free. There's a video link here that I'd like you to watch. It's one of my favorite things, about, showing you information about the Declaration of Independence. Morgan Freeman is on there discussing and talking about it. If we were in class together, we would have an amazing, wonderful debate about this, because Declaration of Independence is one of the most beautifully written documents in the history of the world, but it's also one of the most hypocritical documents in the history of the world, claiming that all men are created equal in a society where not all men were equal, not in the least little bit. So it's a very hypocritical document, but a beautiful one that we hopefully try to aspire to achieve what it actually says. All right, that's where I'm pausing for today, because tomorrow we will pick up and say the American Revolution, war actually begins. Good job.